Hello, everyone. Over the past year or so, AII has been working to develop an industry energy and carbon benchmark. And today I'm very excited to have invited Phil Patterson, the brainchild behind the benchmark, to tell us more about it. Phil has a consultancy called Color Connections. So as the title suggests, he is very much a wet processing expert, which is a large portion of what we're going to be talking about today. Hi, Phil. It's great to have you here.
Hi, Pauline. It's a pleasure.
Fantastic. So the reason why we want to talk about the benchmark today is not only that it's just been launched, but that it is also tied to the topic of electrification or preparing for electrification through reducing thermal load. Indeed, a lot of the tracking that has to be done in order to measure the impact of interventions can be done and proven through the benchmark. But actually, the key reason why we have developed this benchmark is to improve the business case for those interventions. Many of the projects that will electrify or advanced projects that will reduce the thermal load of a facility have a return on investment of longer than 2 years, which makes them hard to do. And without long-term business commitments, this then makes it difficult to implement these projects because the payback of the project might be longer than the contract you have with the brand who is encouraging you to do it. So the purpose of the benchmark really is to create that long-term vision so that brand sourcing teams can say, we want our benchmark to head in this direction, and we want to hit this number by 2030, this number by 2035, and so on. And that would give a clear insight to the factory to say, okay, I might not have a contract that's 5 or 10 years long, but I know that if I implement this project, which has a longer ROI, the chances that I get increased business or continued business is there because I'm decarbonizing in line with what the brand has communicated via their benchmark plans. So that's a bit of the context. So Phil, I'd really like to hear your perspective on what you think this benchmark can do in terms of potential to accelerate action on decarbonization.
Well, I've worked in the sustainability space for over 25 years now, and what you do see is whatever the topic, I've primarily been involved in chemicals, in water, in energy, but whatever the subject, you have various stages. You first have denial. People say there's a problem. People say no, there's not a problem. Then you have acceptance, and in that stage, it's like, well, what are we going to do then? Then you get some leaders who do take action. And they do things, but they're often in the land of please, as I call it. It's like, please improve, please use less water, please use less harmful chemicals. And you only see significant cumulative action when you get agreed global limits or standards. And currently, we've got a lot of excellent work happening in the world of sustainability in relation to energy and emissions, but a lot of it is in the land of please. And what benchmarks will do, they will create an agreed, pragmatic, global standard or way of working, which means that everybody can see whether people are good, if they're bad, if they're okay. Because at the moment, there's a lot of percentage reduction work happening, and you can still have a situation where somebody has a large percentage reduction and they're still terrible. But equally, you've got some world-class facilities that are being pushed for 20%, 25%, 30% reductions. And they're brilliant, and they can't deliver that without incredibly high budgets. And you reach this point of diminishing returns where you've got to pay more and more and more to save less and less energy or less and less emissions. So what benchmarking does, it creates this framework, but it also means that ultimately, not initially, but ultimately there will be a compliance aspect to something. So having lived through the chemical revolution in terms of introduction of limits, etc., you see that once they become accepted as reasonable, pragmatic limits, people don't whinge anymore that oh, this chemical is more expensive than lead and uranium. They just accept we can't use lead and uranium anymore, and we've got to use this safer one. And it becomes a level playing field for these things as well. So whilst I'm absolutely aware and behind trying to get the return on investment as low as possible, once this enters a compliance arena, as it will do in the coming years, there's no doubt about it, then people have to do it. But you present it in a way that's fair and is pragmatic.
That's super interesting. And if you then take your experience in chemical regulation, let's say, you've given an example, but it would be great to hear how you think once we have this level playing field and definitions and limits, etc., how the brand and supplier interaction might change when it comes to incentivizing decarbonization projects.
Yeah, I mean, what you've got with chemicals, you've got a lot of fragmented global legislation. When I first started working on this around the turn of the century, there's not that much chemical legislation, and it was actually brands that led the change. And the Affirm Group was formed in 2004 by concerned brands who wanted to do things a lot better, and in the absence of coherent, joined up global legislation, the Affirm Group have created standards which become the de facto global standards for products. And everybody now understands that and works towards that. That's what they've become. Similarly, with ZDHC and the chemical inputs, I chair the MRSL Council, and I also chair the Wastewater Council. The MRSL have become the de facto global standards for chemical inputs, and the wastewater the de facto global standards for effluent outputs. And as long as they're reasonable and they're fair and they're stringent, nobody really argues about it, and people just get on and do it. So instead of brands pushing, I want 30% more next year and 30% the year after, whatever, it said, well, we'll meet this actual absolute limit, not percentage reduction. So if you are, for your type of facility, if you are below that threshold, then great. And if you're not, we're going to have to work with you to find ways to get below it. So I think it's not really hopefully it will mean that things change, so it's not brands telling the industry what to do and using things as sticks. The industry can use the benchmark initially to self-appraise, see where they are and see where they need to improve before it becomes a compliance situation. So I'm hopeful that, like with chemicals, there's always a bit of tension, and these things are not without any sort of debates or anything, but ultimately, I would see this as we're meeting whatever standard, and therefore you almost leave us alone. That would be the main benefit of this for industry. This is a tool for industry as much as it is for brands in the wider world.
And you've used the word standard a lot, and limits, and language that is maybe a bit more technical and leaning towards the actual substance of the benchmark. So I'd love to hear from you, again, as the brainchild behind it, in very simple terms, what actually is the benchmark? How was it calculated?
Okay, I'll give you a little bit of history as well. So as part of the Climate Solutions Portfolio Advisory Council, we were looking at ways to compare different initiatives and different projects at various different parts of the supply chain. So we were looking at giving grants to things that were, farmers asking for money, dyers, spinners, weavers, technical machinery companies with technical solutions. And what we had to do is we had to find a way to quantify the savings of those projects. So we developed what we call the gas map, which maps the CO2 emissions for every process in the textile supply chain. And then we created a tool called the Ready Reckoner, which then we could say, well, this process is going to, or this project is going to save this amount of CO2 by working out what it applied to, how it was likely to roll out, etc. And when we got that gas map, the question was asked, could we develop benchmarks from this? And the answer to that is yes, we can. So we've got this database of energy intensity figures for processors and sub-processors. And then we just ask a facility, what are your products and processes? We develop a tailored target for that facility, and then we can assess whether they meet it, they don't meet it. And we also give them information on how they're performing in terms of emissions, because the type of fuel they use, the type of grid they're wired up to, will have an impact on emissions. So two facilities using the same kilowatt hours per kg may have different emissions in terms of grams of CO2 per kg, depending on the fuel and the grids, etc. Now we set a global target for emissions, and people can judge, are they better than the global average? In future, we'll be working on regional emissions targets, which will enable people to see where they perform against their peers in that region. Yeah. So if they're in a particularly high emissions fuel area, so a region where they've only got access to coal, which is a high emissions fuel, and they've only got access to a grid that's run on coal, their emissions per kilowatt hour will be higher than somebody who uses gas on site or is linked up to a different grid. So that's how it works. We set the target fairly, objectively, and then we appraise them fairly and objectively by looking at how much fuel they use relative to the production they produce.
Yeah, it's great to hear that, you know, I've seen the tool, and also I love the history lesson, you know, its predecessor, the Ready Reckoner. It is incredibly detailed, which at first glance maybe is a little bit intimidating, but the whole tool is not relevant for every factory, right? It has so much detail because it's looking at every different process and sub-process in the sector, and you really then only select the ones that are relevant for you. So there is a baseline, but that baseline is relative to what you are actually producing, which is so different from the way that we evaluate things today. And I really like the way you explained the ambition for how we're looking at the carbon intensity in the future, to have those targets be relative to different countries. Because if we look at electrification, which, you know, we all recognize as a long-term aspirational goal for the sector, it will look very different in different countries. You know, the speed at which that it's possible and really starts to save emissions depending on local factors that you mentioned. So it will be more fair to judge, it will be more fair to evaluate factories based on what is actually the regional context and what's possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to the facilities, but I think ultimately there may be some pressure brought to bear on governments and industry.
Yes, absolutely.
To clean up grids. So, if you've only got access to, you know, coal, then can you get access to other lower emissions fuels or other ways of working? So we've got to find that balance. We don't think it will be fair for somebody to be kicked out of the supply chain because they happen to only have access to coal.
Of course.
But the long-term direction of travel is to sort of reduce emissions and ultimately via electrification, as you say. Now, you can't electrify if the local conditions don't allow it. Well, you can, but you move backwards. The life is generators that make electricity are incredibly inefficient compared to boilers. If you put electric equipment in the wrong place, wired up to a dirty grid, then you go backwards in terms of emissions, and not just a little bit. It can be a really, really bad mistake. So we've got to make sure the local conditions are right before we start just saying electrify.
And that means you could, I guess, also simulate with the benchmark if I do electrify, or if I install a piece of new equipment that might change the energy intensity of a process, ideally you could then kind of evaluate what will be the impact on my benchmark with this project, and is that going to give me the carbon return on investment that I'm looking for?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, what we will give with the benchmark tool is people will get a dashboard, so they will get their targets, and we will look at the total energy use based on the energy content of fuel. We'll also split that into thermal energy and electrical energy, and that's very useful in terms of what is easy to electrify, what's less easy to electrify. We'll also look at the emissions, and we'll look at the emissions relative to thermal energy and emissions relative to electricity. So they'll get that picture, which will help them sort of drill down. We'll also have some tools to give indications of performance within a vertical facility. So you might have a vertical facility that's got two processes in there, let's say spinning and dyeing, and they're assessed and they are average, they're okay. But actually, they've got world-class spinning and a terrible dye house. You want to know that if you want to know where to improve. AI may, as AI do, support the industry with know-how and expertise, but I think there will be other providers that can step into the space and help people to meet benchmarks if they're not meeting them already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to touch on not so much the technical approach for getting this together, which you've explained, but more the stakeholder approach. You mentioned earlier that the advent of new standards and limits that can be challenging to, I guess, not only define the technical components, but what is good, what is bad, what is okay. Can you tell us a bit about the stakeholder approach that was led by Apparel Impact Institute and yourself to come to an agreement on what the benchmark should be? The
benchmark was initially built using a combination of primary data from what myself and other wet processing specialists regarded as typical facilities. So not world class, not terrible, but sort of typical. Okay, and that's the aim. The benchmark tells you what a typical facility should be achieving in terms of energy use. And where we didn't have primary data, we've used modeling software so that we know what a typical process is for cotton. And if we've got data for that, we can model process using the same sort of facility model for polyester or for nylon or for acrylic or whatever. And then we've also put it through review. We've got a technical review committee where everything has been transparent. Everybody's had the ability to look at this and say, well, I think that's a little bit, that process is a bit long, a little bit too short. Fundamentally, that has gone through a council review where we've got people from industry, people from brands, people that are expert engineers, people that are expert dyers, and that's
suppliers as well, I think, right?
Yeah. So in terms of does this represent what is happening in industry? I think we're fairly comfortable on the wet processing side that is right. Now, if we want to work out what is average in the industry, we've got to use the full spread of performance. Unfortunately, at the bottom end, they're so bad, they don't have any data. So you've got to rely on industry experts and professionals to say, well, in my experience of working in the industry for 30 years, this is how bad they are, and throw that data into the pot. So people confuse accuracy with whose name is on the study. Accuracy is as close to the truth as you can get. We do need to be aware that we're looking at an industry where only certain parts can provide us with good data at the moment. And if we waited for that good primary data, we'd have been waiting beyond 2050. So we've had to fill some gaps, and we've had to sense check it. We've also based these on model processes for wet processing so that they tie in with the Inditex Care for Water program, because that is also going to be taken on by ZDHC to extend that so that they are industry-wide water targets. So the water targets and the energy and emissions targets are all going to be underpinned by the same model processes. So, and again, those model processes have been checked by thousands of facilities over a long period of time. So but what we're not saying is this is it on version 1 launch. We're not saying this is right. We're not saying this isn't subject to change. Everything will be reviewed as we get more data in.
Yep.
The technical review council will evolve, and we'll get we'll make sure we get the right voices, the right people in there to assess data and to evolve things, to make sure that it's a live, always live situation where things can be challenged, things can be changed.
I'd love to hear from you to kind of conclude. What would be your ambition a year from now in terms of where would the benchmark be? How would the industry be using it?
Well, I think what we really hope for is that the industry and the facilities are using the benchmark tool to look for opportunities where they can improve, so that the facilities themselves know whether they are good, bad, excellent, terrible, whatever, and they can look at their energy split, thermal, electrical. They can look at their emissions, and I think as well, I would hope that we're starting to see brands push for performance, without being prescriptive, so that the decisions on how to improve a facility are made by the facilities themselves, because they know what's right for them in their conditions. They'll also have the better calculations in terms of return on investment, etc. And that would be an excellent start in a year. The other thing as well, that with benchmarks, people need to start thinking about, well, where's my energy going? People don't think of it. Think of it almost like little particles going through your factory. Where's it going? Where am I living? And you've got facilities that insulate the pipes but not the machines. Why don't we insulate machines? You've got heat recovery systems, which are very much seen as nice to have, but if that reduces your energy demand by 30% in a finishing department, they might start to become must-haves. So I think the whole thing about benchmark targets it's not just the rollout of that program by AII. I think it will be the people starting to realise, actually, we do need to meet these targets. So I didn't realise it was that bad, and what can I do about it? So I think we'll see the program go, but we'll also start seeing some more on the ground action. But that's not to say there aren't brands, multi-stakeholder initiatives, and individual facilities that aren't doing a huge amount already. All we're providing is something additional to that gives a little bit more clarity in terms of the target.
Thank you so much. I really loved what you said about the benchmark being a framework for assessment that brands can request and then track, but then actually leaving it up to the facility to decide what is best to do with that we come to a less prescriptive model of decarbonization, and one that's truly informed by data, by the very specific context of a factory, which this benchmark absolutely allows us to analyze and to make decisions on. So thank you so much for explaining the benchmark to us. We're very excited that it is now launching. And to anyone who has listened and is interested in it, please reach out to Apparel Impact Institute, because to Phil's point, we have big ambitions for what this can do in the next year, and we're delighted that Phil has helped us get there, and we'll look forward to reporting on what we have achieved in the next year. Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks, Pauline.